Closing arguments began today. Hello, my fam. It is Perez, the queen of all media, the original influencer, and your #1 source for everything Diddy drama. The prosecution in the federal trial against disgraced music mogul Sean Combs did their best today to convince the jury across 5 hours that he should be found guilty on all charges. Before we get into what happened in court, I want to share with you Aubrey O'Day, whom many of you know as one of Diddy's proteges. She was in Danity Kane. She also was this close to going to law school before she pursued her career in music. Aubrey is very smart and, like me, has been following this case daily. O'Day was just asked by Entertainment Tonight her prediction, and this is what she has to say. Okay.
Your prediction once the jury deliberates?
I would say they definitely have him on possessing people on 2 of the charges. I believe one of the sex trafficking charges, yes. The other one, no. I think Rico's going to come back home.
What is especially frustrating is I've been saying this as well. I have, for a while now, been predicting guilty on some charges and not guilty on others. But he will still do substantial time behind bars. Unless, by some miraculous chance, he's acquitted of all charges. Christy Slavic was the prosecutor for the federal government who made the case today in the closing arguments. He is the leader of a criminal enterprise. He doesn't take no for an answer, and now you know about many crimes the defendant committed with members of his enterprise, she told the jury. You heard all about how the defendant again and again forced, threatened, and manipulated Cassie and Jane to have sex with escorts for his own entertainment. He used power, violence, and fear to get what he wanted. It was his kingdom. Everyone was there to serve him. In great detail, she walked the jury through the federal government's 3 charges against him. She asserted that all of the evidence, when tied together, showed beyond a reasonable doubt that Diddy was guilty of 1 count of racketeering conspiracy, 2 counts of sex trafficking, and 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. She argued that Diddy used his closest associates, his employees, to force Cassie and Jane into his drug-fueled freak-offs. The prosecutor argued that Diddy's underlings carried out an array of crimes to make him happy, including kidnapping, arson, and bribery. He was able to get away with it due to his money, power, and influence. And that stops now. It's time to hold him accountable. It is time for justice. It is time to find him guilty. I hope so. Throughout closing arguments today, the prosecution leaned on the testimony of a woman who didn't know many details of their case, forensic psychologist Dawn Hughes. As a blind expert, Hughes wasn't aware of the particulars of the government's case against Diddy and spoke instead about patterns in how victims of physical and sexual abuse respond to their abusers. She talked about love bombing and trauma bonding and helped to explain the many reasons why Cassie and Jane and his former assistant Mia, another one of his victims that he raped, they didn't walk away from him even though they had the means to. The whole psychology behind that, I think it was a very, very important reminder for closing arguments. For the first time in weeks in court today were Diddy's daughters. Thankfully, they were spared the majority of the gruesome details and disgusting days of testimony from victim after victim after victim and enabler and escorts. To that point, Slavic said a lot of evidence was hard to hear, hard to see, she told the jury. The I don't know. I'm going to keep that in because that was funny. The defendant ran his criminal enterprise with total control and with the loyal assistance of his inner circle. Foot soldiers, personal assistants who knew their one job was to say yes to the defendant. All of this paints a clear picture of how the defendant committed crime after crime for 2 decades, how he didn't take no for an answer. She kept repeating some of the most important parts, wouldn't take no for an answer, over and over again. The defendant counted on silence and shame to keep his crimes hidden. He thought that his fame, wealth, and power put him above the law. But over the course of this trial, his crimes have been exposed. The prosecutor made a good distinction that when she was talking about the enterprise that facilitated his criminal activities, she was not referring to his company or businesses. The enterprise is Diddy and this trusted inner circle, Slavic said. And it existed to serve his needs, and what he said went. Oh, so happy she did this. Then the prosecutor showed the jury a photo of Christina Coram, his former chief of staff, describing her as one of his most loyal lieutenants and a co-conspirator. Coram knew where the defendant was and what he was doing at all time. She made the defendant's life her life. And she said yes to everything he wanted. The prosecution also accused Diddy of obstructing justice in their closing, reminding the jury that Cassie sued him in civil court in 2023, which he swiftly settled, and he worked to neutralize 2 of the people who could damage him the most, Jane and Mia. But this time, paying people off with $100,000 in a brown paper bag was not an option. The prosecutor said that he was the boss of every member of his inner circle, and he was in charge. Over time, the members of the enterprise would change a bit, but Diddy was always there. He was the through line, and the other members worked with each other and with him throughout the entire conspiracy. We were reminded of Capricorn Clark, one of his many victims of forced labor, his former assistant, who was terrified that what would happen to her if she didn't do what he said, including going to confront Suge Knight while he was high and armed. They talked about his drug distribution. Quote, he fed his victims drugs for years, and you know he didn't get those drugs on his own. He used his enterprise. The prosecution reminded the jury of how Diddy bribed the hotel security guards to get the footage of Cassie at the Intercontinental in Los Angeles. That footage which was shown so many times throughout the trial. And so many people helped him to acquire that footage. And here we are, all these years later, decades later, and the jury is set to begin deliberation on Monday. I've said what I think is going to happen. Aubrey O'Day said what she thinks is going to happen. I'm curious, if you're watching this video, I think you've been paying attention. What do you think is going to be the result? Let's discuss that and everything in the comments section.